Hello and welcome to Yodo. I'm Dr. Bone, and this is a place where we talk about various issues related to serious illness. The video today is going to discuss a book that I recently read called On Death, Dying, and Not Dying. It's by Peter Houghton. Dr. Lisa Tartaglia loaned this book to me and I read it, made my way through it. It's really a short read, but it's really impactful. I'm going to read just an excerpt off the back. In June of 2000, Peter Houghton, a counselor in palliative care, was himself just weeks away from death due to cardiomyopathy, and he made his preparations and said his goodbyes. So this book is written by a person who was a counselor for palliative care and from his point of view as a patient. Mr. Houghton had accepted a place in a clinical trial for a Jarvik heart assist device. The book is written by him with the knowledge and experience as a palliative care specialist from the point of view as a patient. The book details many of his experiences. His device was placed in June of 2000, and he died with the device in place in August of 2004, alive because of its function, just over 1,500 days. I was impressed that he alluded to a sense of awareness that he had become aware of his nearing death, and that the process of facing his own mortality and the preparation for his death, he had closed off parts of himself that he never regained access to. He had made mental preparations for death, and somewhere in that process, he had become ready for what's next. And once that happened, he felt he could not go back. The author had suffered a heart attack in 1996, possibly triggered by a viral influenza that had been very severe. Over the next few years, he had noted progressive decline in his ability to be active. He'd had symptoms of increasing shortness of breath and increasing edema. He was informed of his bad heart valve, also contributed to his decline. Because of the bad heart valve and the weak heart muscle, one affected the other. He couldn't have his heart valve fixed because it would have put too much pressure on his already weak heart. So he had developed this catch-22. He couldn't do one thing because of the other, and the other thing prevented him from doing the one thing. Thus, medical management was all that was offered for him. He found medications did reduce some of his symptoms and managed many of the others, but they didn't make his heart muscle better, and although the medications did help, they also had their side effects. Just 4 years after his heart event, his ejection fraction was reduced from normal being 60 to 70%, was reduced to just 10% of his heart ejection fraction. Every beat of his heart, only 10% of the contents were being pushed out of the heart to circulate the blood and nutrients around his body. Thus, he was dying from congestive heart failure due to the weak heart muscle, to cardiomyopathy. He described the symptoms that plagued him and included them as weakness, fatigue, shortness of breath, gout, edema, weight gain, and poor circulation. He just felt bad all over. He wanted his point of view of the book to be from the point of view of not dying. He brings to the page his own journey facing death with the experience as a counselor for others who have lost a loved one, as well as patients that are facing the end of life. He pointed out that not just his, but included multiple points of view of others regarding serious illness and facing the information that life expectancy is limited. He revealed some of his own personal feelings and missed goals that contributed to his grief. He commented on his life achievements and how this gave him a sense of pride and encouragement. He admitted the difficulty accepting the truth of his own failing heart and the realization of his own mortality. He accounted the changes in his thoughts and spirituality over time as he became more aware of his health changes and decline. He reflected on his surgery, the pain, his recovery, and the improvement. He admitted his apathy and his sense of remaining emotion being so limited. It crept up on him and progressed, and he didn't feel that it resolved. In the book, he tells a story about needing a new pair of shoes, and the lack of energy and desire that he had to obtain that new pair of shoes, that he felt obtaining the new shoes would be pointless, and he didn't have the strength mentally or physically to go get a new pair of shoes. The true sadness for me in this book is that he became so emotionally flat. Not angry, not sad, but nothingness was replaced. He even described his apathy toward everything, no longer looking forward to life or events or companionship, no longer fearing death or change either. Early in the book, he related how he began to follow his own advice, preparing to let go, doing last things. He discussed the list of last things that he wanted to address and to take care of personally, and how he had advised others on that same journey to take care of those things, so he was doing what he had suggested to others. He reviewed his feelings toward facing those tasks, that facing his death, he was not able to imagine what it would be like, even with his own education and experience. Just as he completed his tasks, he was then evaluated for and offered the opportunity to accept the clinical trial for the Jarvik heart pump assist device. He communicated his concerns, his questions, and his hesitations about becoming a participant. He accounted his wife's selfless position to support his own decision, regardless of what his choice might be, and how difficult that was for her and how much he admired her for that. He provided his account after the surgery, his loss of sense of self, his loss of sense of time, the blur of days in the ICU with tubes and wires and lab draws and medications, the sense that life was just in a haze. Then he described the day that the endotracheal tube came out and what followed. When he woke, he found himself to be with a new kind of weakness and a new kind of pain, physical, and he had emotional pain. Both similar and yet different, more intense than what he felt he had prior to the surgery. He described the issues that he had with the device, having to go back to the operating room, and what an insult that was to him morally. He accounted for the multiple changes in his body as the heart device began to work and his body began to improve. The fluid and the edema became managed, and he developed new issues because of the heart functioning better and the return of the circulation, yet that was not a happy time for him. He described the side effects of the pain medications, his poor appetite, his symptoms of constipation, his weakened immune system with the development of infections. He accounted his frustration with wound issues, drainage, and more surgical procedures being needed, and the healing that was required after each one of those insults. His journey from the time of the Jarvik placement to return to his home took about 80 days, 10.5 weeks. Nearly 3 full months was required. He discussed his quandary. Was it worth it? And to my mind, he never came to that conclusion in the book. He was offered evaluation for a heart transplant, and he discussed his reasons for declining that offer for evaluation. He accounted what he called returning to life and gave it 3 stages that he felt overlapped but had clear characteristics. The exhibit stage, where he felt like he was some sort of a study object, not a person, but he described it as feeling like a guinea pig. The confused stage for him was when he questioned what he could do, who he was, what his relationships were. He felt that at some point during that confusion stage, he had an epiphany where he wondered if a lot of what he felt was because he had no hope, and he didn't feel that he ever regained that hope. During his reemergence stage, he found that what he wanted was new dreams. He wanted new hope, and he wanted the energy to have that hope. He wanted the energy to allow himself to have those new dreams. He considered his physical process of dying as well. He accounted how, for many, the concept of death is so misunderstood. He affirmed that there are few instances that death is a single event, a sudden occurrence. It is a true known fact that for most people, they die over a period of time. Only about 10% of the American population will die suddenly. The other 90% of us will have death approach slowly. That's the phrase that I use with patients and families. I speak about how death approaches. He discusses this concept in depth, covering his own personal feelings. He broke down his process of dying into 3 stages. The diagnosis of the life-limiting illness, that treatment options have become limited and management focuses now on symptoms, and as a sufferer, he needed constant care. He had decline in his body, increase in weakness, and he became dependent. He reviewed from his point of view as a palliative specialist the palliative care model, methods, goals, what is addressed, the symptoms to be managed, and how each of these became the very forefront of his everyday life. He also shared how control of those symptoms can result in improvement clinically and emotionally. He described various types of pain beyond physical, but how these are interrelated and medications may not address the physical pain if the emotional and spiritual issues are not addressed. This is an excellent discussion of the various symptoms that can be experienced by patients as death nears, with his account of signs of death nearing in the final days and hours really being quite descriptive. He explored the stress to the caregiver, particularly in the days when death is near, but from the viewpoint of the patient. He provided insight to the anxiety and the fears that they face. He also commented on suffering and related that he found it, from his point of view, to be pointless and dehumanizing. He commented that in some cultures or religions, the belief system may view suffering as necessary or a test of faith, part of a ritual or an atonement. He did not share that viewpoint. His thoughts for suffering seemed to be every aspect of suffering needs to be addressed. He wanted all efforts to be employed to relieve all suffering, to provide help to address the inner questions of the patient, to address the growing dependence on others, and he brought up his thoughts on the meaning of life and fate and what comes next. He also expressed 4 broad considerations of his emotions regarding the dying process: his helplessness, the conflicts, sympathy fatigue, and unresolved issues. And he alluded to that each of these impacts everyone involved, the patient, the family, as well as the healthcare team. These factors affect everyone in some way, addressing our own flaws, weaknesses, feelings, limits of money, time, skills, stamina, as well as our own mortality and our own journey of life. A particularly impactful comment that he made regarded the weight of feelings and thoughts of family members on the patients. When the family communicates to the patient that they can try, they need to try, they continue to need to fight, that they're fighters and not quitters, that when these comments continue to be made after the person has reached a transition point, that dying person has accepted they need that care, their decline, and they're nearing death, when they communicate to a patient that they can try, they need to try, they're fighters, they're not quitters. And he felt that sometimes this reaches a point where it's actually detrimental to the patient, that when these comments continue to be made after the person has reached a transition point, that those can be harmful to the patient. When the dying patient has accepted that they need care and they're nearing death, the patient becomes fearful or ashamed to reveal the extent of their need. The loving family has become either unwilling or unable to accept that the early stages of dying and acceptance of dying have begun, that turning back from this point here now has become unlikely. And families can put that pressure even harder on patients, that no stone be left unturned, or that blame is somewhere to be laid. And that he felt that pressure himself, that clinging to the precious concept of life became even more important, and that applied more burden. He provided further insight. The author explored various reasons why physicians don't want to disclose information regarding the prognosis and their reluctance to discuss potential adverse effects of continued attempts at curative treatment. He covered risks of the patients being exploited, willfully or unintended, by family members or by the healthcare system. He gave it, for instance, that a biologically close family is distant physically from the patient, and that more distant relatives or neighbors or friends that live closer may assume some intimate roles, and then the patient feels a financial obligation toward those people and can make changes that can financially affect the rest of the family. He also had information about clinical trials and healthcare itself, and made statements regarding willingness of patients and family to accept these unknown risks, and even termed this himself as being a guinea pig. His comments regarding his own personal experience were void of advice for others. He pointed out facts regarding the extent of illness, the odds of improvement, not necessarily finding success, but just delaying the time of death, possibly the increase in suffering or pain, and even chances for what some might consider a worse outcome happening because of these continued efforts at improvement or prolonged life. He provided a long account of his frustrations. He admitted disappointment with the food at the hospital. He noted that he wanted the hospital to look cleaner. He confessed his irritation with other patients, as well as some of the providers that delivered the care. He confessed his questions regarding his decisions and his reasons, as well as his changed feelings and emotions after surgery. He provided comments that to him, it was the quality of life he determined to be meaningful, and it was not good enough just to be alive or to hold death at bay. The lesson for him was that autonomy was to be valued, to be able to walk, travel, feed and toilet himself, and participate in accomplishment of chores became really important to him. What was surprising to me about this, that as a palliative mental health counselor, he did not receive the same care that he provided to others. And I completely excuse him from not knowing all of this information, because we must allow a patient to be a patient, the spouse to be the spouse, and the family to be family. I believe that the providers of the health care are to prepare each person for their journey, and it's our responsibility. The final chapters of the book were contributions from others involved in the placement of the Jarvik heart assist device into Mr. Houghton. These final entries account the events from the point of view of the surgical team, and I'm not going to review those because my interest in this is more from the patient's aspect. For me, this was really a thought-provoking book, and it renewed my desire to provide assistance to those facing this final journey. The patient and family deserve to have expert guides along the way, to have assistance with identification and treatment of the symptoms that they encounter, the help that they need to ease the burdens that accompany the end of life. If you or a loved one has a serious illness, please communicate to your PCP and your specialist your questions and your concerns. Reach out to allow assistance to be provided. Help is available and you are entitled to care. We can always care. And when cure is not possible, compassion is even more important. Thank you for your time. If you have a book that you'd like for us to review and discuss, please let me know. Bye now.